everybody. Welcome to Reviewing the Ethical Aspects of a Nursing Study. I'm Brenda Corey.
And I'm Sarah Mallow. We are pre-recording this lecture for you so that we can spend more time during orientation discussing the course outline, the assignment, and schedule. We also hope that by posting this lecture in December, it allows you more time to review this content so you are able to apply it to your assignment critique. Just a reminder that the assignment critique, Part A, is due on January 16th.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the history of ethical violations. The establishment of institutional review boards occurred in response to unethical research projects in the past. The best known examples include the Nazi medical experiments and the Tuskegee syphilis study. The Nazi experiments occurred during World War II. A number of German physicians conducted painful and often deadly experiments on thousands of concentration camp prisoners without their consent. It involved exposing subjects to high altitudes, freezing temperatures, malaria, untested drugs, and experiments to produce a population of racially pure Germans. In Tuskegee, what they wanted to study was the untreated disease, so they deliberately withheld treatment from men from a poor black community in the South for syphilis, even after penicillin became generally available in order to study the progression of the disease.
In response to human rights violations, various codes of ethics have been developed. One of the first internationally recognized sets of ethical standards is the Nuremberg Code, developed in 1949 after the Nazi atrocities were made public in the Nuremberg trials. Another notable set of international standards is the Declaration of Helsinki, which was adopted in 1964 by the World Medical Assembly and most recently revised in 2000. The Belmont Report was released in 1979, which still impacts research today. They include guidelines for research such as identifying the differences between research and activities that are routine care, establishing the importance of reviewing the risk-benefit ratio, establishing guidelines for the selection of human subjects, and identifying what is required in the informed consent process. Most disciplines have established their own code of ethics. In Canada, the Canadian Nurses Association first published a document entitled Ethical Guidelines for Nurses in Research Involving Human Participants in 1983. All students are also familiar with the 2008 version of the Code of Ethics for Registered Nurses document. The Tri-Council Policy Statement, Ethical Conduct of Research Involving Humans, was created in 1998 as guidelines to protect human subjects in all types of research. These guidelines are also used by the Ethics Review Board here at Red Deer College.
A fundamental principle of modern research ethics is respect for human dignity. The principle of respect for human dignity encompasses the right to self-determination and the right to full disclosure. The principle of self-determination means that the prospective participants have the right to decide voluntarily whether to participate in a study without the risk of incurring adverse consequences. It also means that participants have the right to ask questions, to refuse to give information, and to withdraw from the study. Coercion involves explicit or implicit threats of penalty for failing to participate in a study or excessive rewards for agreeing to participate. The obligation to protect potential participants from coercion requires careful consideration when researchers are in a position of authority or influence over potential participants, as might be the case in a nurse-patient relationship. Coercion can in some cases be very subtle. For example, a generous monetary incentive offered to encourage the participation of economically disadvantaged groups, such as the homeless, might be mildly coercive because such incentives could place undue pressure on prospective participants to participate. The principle of respect for human dignity also includes people's rights to make informed, voluntary decisions about study participation, which requires full disclosure. Full disclosure means that the researcher has fully described the nature of the study, the person's right to refuse participation, the researcher's responsibilities, and the likely risks and benefits that would be incurred.
Now that you're familiar with fundamental ethical principles for conducting research, you need to understand the procedures researchers follow to adhere to them. These procedures should be evaluated in critiquing the ethical aspects of a study. Each of these will be discussed throughout the next few slides. The review of the risk-benefit ratio is important to the ethical review. There are excellent examples in box 5.1 of your textbook on page 78. One principle related to a balanced distribution of harm and benefits is that of beneficence, which imposes a duty on researchers to maximize net benefits. In most research, the primary benefit concerns the advancement of knowledge, which can be used to promote human health and welfare in the long run. Another related principle is non-maleficence, researchers' duty to avoid or minimize harm to participants. Non-maleficence also involves ensuring freedom from exploitation. Involvement in a study should not place participants at a disadvantage or expose them to situations for which they have not been prepared. All research involves some risks, but in many cases the risk is minimal. Minimal risk is defined as risks anticipated to be no greater than those ordinarily encountered in daily life or during routine tests or procedures. When the risks are not minimal, researchers must proceed with caution, taking every step possible to reduce risk and maximize benefits.
Informed consent is based on the right to self-determination and full disclosure, but in certain circumstances, participants' right to self-determination poses challenges. An important issue concerns some people's inability to make well-informed judgments about the costs and benefits of participation, for example, children. We will discuss the issue of special classes of research participants in the next section. A particularly important procedure for safeguarding human subjects and protecting their right to self-determination involves obtaining evidence of their informed consents. Researchers usually document the informed consent process by having participants sign a consent form, an example of which is shown in Figure 5.1 on page 80 of your textbook. This form includes information about the study purpose, specific expectations regarding participation, for example, how much time will be involved, the voluntary nature of participation, and potential costs and benefits. Please note, however, that researchers rarely obtain written informed consent when the primary means of data collection is through self-administered questionnaires. Researchers generally assume implied consent. That means that the return of the completed questionnaire reflects respondents' voluntary consent to participate.
Participants also have the right to respect that any data they provide will be kept in strictest confidence. The principle of respect for privacy and confidentiality protect access to personal information. When study participants confide personal information to the researchers or when their behavior is observed, researchers have an obligation not to share the information with others, even family members or care providers, without the subject's consent. A promise of confidentiality to participants is a pledge that any information they provide will not be publicly reported or made accessible to parties not involved in the research. Anonymity is considered when no one, including the researcher, can link the study data from a particular individual to that individual. This can often be used with questionnaires or surveys, as they are often returned by mail anonymously. Anonymity is not possible when the researcher interviews subjects.
Ethical obligations are heightened when the people under study are deemed to be a vulnerable group. Vulnerable subjects, a term often used to refer to at-risk study participants, are people with diminished competence or decision-making ability. The Tri-Council policy statement instructs researchers to afford vulnerable groups special protections against exploitation or discrimination. Groups that are considered to be vulnerable because of diminished competence include children, mentally or emotionally disabled people, and others who are unable to understand information or appreciate the consequences of participation. For example, also comatose patients. There are procedures described for the treatment of vulnerable groups on page 82 of 83 of your textbook.
Review boards review and approve research projects and assess that ethical standards are met in relation to the protection of the rights of human subjects. All research has the potential to impose some measure of harm, ranging from the minor inconvenience of one's time being taken up to the possible loss of life. It is the responsibility of the review board, in concert with the researcher, to ensure that the necessary protections for participants within the legitimate requirements of research will be met. So happy holidays to everybody.
So for those of you that are reviewing this class during the month of December, we hope that you are having a nice holiday with your friends and family. We look forward to seeing you in January.